The College Football Board has approved an expansion from the 4-team playoff format to now the 12-team playoff format starting in 2026, maybe even earlier. I want to discuss how this will impact Clemson and my thoughts on it. Before we do, though, make sure you hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can stay up to date on all of my exclusive Clemson content I put out every single week. All right, fans. So the college football expansion is here. It's starting in 2026, maybe even earlier, but it's going to go from 4 teams to 12 teams. And it seems like the majority vote out there is that this is a good thing. I want to take a step back and think about why I feel like it's a good thing, but going backwards to what happened in the offseason with the expansion of the Big Ten. We know from the previous year, expansion of the SEC, adding teams, and potentially looking like those two conferences would become a super conference, which made me nervous as a Clemson fan because I don't want the Clemson Tigers to be on the outside looking in or in a lesser conference and not given the respect that they need. Now, we already know that that is difficult in the ACC because it seems like the national media only looks at the SEC or the Big Ten as those powerhouse conferences with all the teams, which we know realistically they're top heavy. The entire conference is not amazing, just like everybody else. Clemson, ACC is top heavy. The problem is those other conferences have a couple more top heavy teams than really just Clemson. And maybe you could throw in Pittsburgh maybe in the mix, but definitely not those top heavy like playoff contenders consistently. Really, Clemson is that team. And so I didn't want Clemson to be on the outside looking in because everybody's saying, well, they don't play anybody or their strength of schedule is not good enough and things like that. So when I see super conferences coming out, that made me nervous. That is kind of tempered down now when you go from a 4-team playoff to a 12-team playoff because I feel like no matter what, Clemson should be in the mix or an automatic into a 12-team format. In a 4-team format, maybe not so much. It gets more difficult. You have your favorites that everybody loves and maybe your bias out there. But when a 12-team playoff comes into factor, really that's kind of eliminated in my opinion. Your ACC champion is going to be in there. Maybe even your second team, the team that made it and lost in the ACC championship game will be there as well. So maybe even 3 teams from the ACC. It's hard to say how it will all work out, but I feel like this is good for Clemson because they don't need to really stress, or at least myself, I don't need to stress about not being in the SEC or the Big Ten. They can stay in the ACC, which they really have to because of the grant of rights. It's a very expensive deal that they're in, and it lasts for a very long time. So it's kind of unrealistic that they could get out of that. So they're going to stay in the ACC, and now with the playoff expansion, that's not a bad thing. They can still be in the ACC. They still perform. And as Graham Neff said, the cool thing about the college football playoff expansion is that they're talking about potentially having a home game for the highest seed outside of those top 4 teams. So the top 4 teams will get a bye from the first round and get automatically qualified into the quarterfinals. So the best case scenario, if you want to play less games, is to be one of those top 4 teams. If you're worried about injury, the best case scenario is be one of those top 4 teams. You will have to play an extra game if you are in that first round. But in that first round, the 5 to 12 teams, ranked teams, the top seeded team will get a choice according to the way they're talking about it now. It's not all completely ironed out, I don't think, but they'll get a choice. Either they play at their own home, which would be great for Clemson, any hometown to be able to play a playoff game in your home stadium. I think would be amazing, and just add to the excitement of a game, and really the ticket sales. We know that, right? Just eyes on those games would be even bigger. I don't like having to travel across the country to like Arizona and California to play 2 Southern teams, or for Clemson to play there at all. Now, if people understand and they see the paw and they know what that means, but a lot of times when I travel to these games that are 1,000 miles away, people are like, well, I didn't know there was a football game going on. That's not going to be the case if you're playing in your home stadium. The other option is that you would pick a neutral site stadium that is of the choosing of the highest ranking seed. So for Clemson, if they were the highest ranking seed, I would expect them to probably pick Charlotte in that case, or maybe Atlanta, depending on what they want to do and maybe where the opponent is at. But to me, that still helps Clemson fans be able to get to the game, be able to pack the stadium out, and be able to make the game more relevant for those that are in the area. And again, it helps that the economy of that area. I think the best case scenario is to play in Clemson. Second case scenario would be maybe Charlotte or Atlanta, the next closest big stadium that's there to get that prestige. And playing a professional stadium would be awesome too. The more you can do that, I think it's great for recruiting and just the national exposure of your organization, your team. So a lot of people talking about the playoffs and they like it. They're talking about the structure and how it's going to work out. Some people say, they worry about players playing more games and maybe getting injured and having the possibility of being injured. Well, here's the thing. What's weird about college football, and a lot of people have said this, is that the highest level of amateur football has no playoff system, and everything else does have a playoff system. The NFL has a playoff system. The FCS has a playoff system. High school football has a playoff system. I mean, you even go to like middle school, some places have playoff systems. So you have playoff systems all the way up until you get to the bowl subdivision where you had the original bowl structure, but no playoff structure until the past couple of years where they had the 4-team playoff structure. So it's kind of weird that you wouldn't have an expanded playoff when everybody else does have a larger playoff. I think for college football as a whole, this is a step in the right direction to become a nationally recognized brand out there. Again, there are still states out there that are solely interested in the NFL or other professional sports that are out there, and college football is having a difficult time reaching those areas, specifically in the West Coast and sometimes in the Northeast, reaching those areas because those teams rarely have a chance because it seems to be so heavily dominated by the Southeastern teams. When you look at college football as a whole, it's dominated by the Southeast. You've got Alabama, Georgia, Clemson. You throw in Ohio State to make it a little bit more northern, but really mostly it's those southern teams that are in the playoffs and being seen the most. And so they get a limited exposure because of that in the playoff setting. Now, I do know that a lot of people say, well, we've seen what happens when the number 1 team plays the number 4 team. They get blown out. More often than not, the number 4 team gets blown out. So what do you think is going to happen if it's the number 6 team or the number 8 team? I think there's going to be a huge blowout. I do think. I worry about that. I don't know if it's going to be as competitive, at least at the beginning, as we think. But the thing is, if we don't change it, if they don't expand it, then it's never going to be competitive. It's going to take some time for those lower seeded teams to become competitive and make their Cinderella run or whatever it may be. But this is what needs to happen to have more relevancy. If you only have that exclusive group of people that constantly make it, then the recruits are always going to go to that exclusive group of teams that constantly make it. If you expand it, then that hopefully will open up the idea of high school players. Hey, I can go to this team and I don't have to worry about being left out of the playoffs because I can help this team get to the playoffs. It'll be easier to get to the playoffs, but more likely. I wouldn't necessarily say easier, but it'd be more likely that they'll have an opportunity, have a chance. And so it could expand the reach of recruiting for other teams. I think it'd be a good thing overall for college football. Hey, don't forget to hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. I put out content every single week talking about the Clemson Tigers. And every Thursday night during the football season, I'll be on 105.5 and 97.5 The Roar. So make sure to listen to me on the air, in the upstate, or on the app.